A conflict the size of the Ukrainian war will have a profound effect on global politics, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. While the physical battles of the Ukrainian war are largely contained within borders, their ramifications span the globe. Perhaps one of the most surprising ways this is manifesting itself is somewhat shielding Taiwan from the unwanted attention of its global superpower neighbor, China. But how does a conflict thousands of miles away influence the security of Taiwan? This is a complex question with no single answer. Of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has shown that there is no such thing as a pushover in war, especially when a population is determined to fight for its sovereignty. This one factor has certainly made the Chinese think more seriously about the wisdom of any military action, but the reasons run deeper than only this. The conflict in Ukraine has underscored the challenges and risks associated with aggression in the modern era. Hybrid warfare tactics, economic repercussions, and the role of international alliances all need to be explored. Join us as we set out to discover how a European war is helping to secure Taiwan from the advances of a global superpower. Despite being separated by 5,000 miles, there are distinct parallels that can be drawn between Ukraine and Taiwan and their relationships with their more powerful neighbors. These parallels were noted even before the Russians began the invasion. Notably, Boris Johnson, the then UK Prime Minister, drew attention to the potential implications for Taiwan. He noted the existence of a heightened threat to Taiwan if the West didn't support Ukraine. More directly, Volodymyr Dubovik, director of the Center for International Studies at Mechnikov National University in Odessa, summed up the similarities, noting, "Russian President Vladimir Putin says there's no such thing as Ukraine, that it's part of Russia, that it's some kind of historical deviation that you have a country called Ukraine." He goes on to note that this corresponds to what China says. Specifically, there is no such thing as Taiwan, and there is just one Chinese nation. Putin's stance on Ukraine can also be directly mirrored with Chinese President Xi Jinping's stance on Taiwan. Both leaders refuse to accept the international status of their neighbors and see them as being the creation of hostile Western forces, with the ultimate goal of weakening their respective countries. Additionally, both Putin and Xi rely on a distorted version of history to support their territorial claims. Putin says that Ukraine has always been Russian, while Xi maintains that Taiwan has belonged to China since ancient times. Neither stance is backed by historical facts, which we'll go into later. The parallels between the two situations go beyond mere rhetoric to encompass geopolitical strategies. Both Putin and Xi are using their respective positions to assert dominance and project power in their regions. The refusal to acknowledge the sovereignty of Ukraine and Taiwan reflects a broader agenda aimed at maintaining control and preserving national interests. So the similarities are plain for all to see. Both Russia and China have ambitions to overwhelm and assimilate their weaker neighbors, Ukraine and Taiwan respectively, into their sphere of influence. The main difference is that Putin has already taken the plunge, and the Chinese can sit back and watch the show. This has the potential to let them learn from the uncountable number of Russian mistakes before deciding on a course of action. Given this advantage, it could be postulated that the war in Ukraine is strengthening the Chinese position. After all, good commanders have always learned from the mistakes of history. But in this case, we need to ask why the opposite is true. We need to ask why the war in Ukraine is strengthening the security of Taiwan and helping to protect it from the unwanted attention of its much larger and more powerful neighbor. Let's have a look at the main lessons from the Ukraine war that are helping to save Taiwan from China. Certainly, from a military standpoint, the difficulties of the war in Ukraine must be a factor. It quickly became apparent that Putin's military was not up to the job at hand. The war has now raged for over 2 years, with hundreds of thousands killed and millions more displaced. But it was never meant to be like this. According to the think tank the Royal United Services Institute, Putin expected to take control of Ukraine within 10 days. This wasn't just a poor calculation, it was wrong to an incredible magnitude. As far as military miscalculations go, this is up there with the best of them. The incompetence of the Russian military and the appalling condition of its hardware were quickly plain for all to see. Put simply, the Russians had a mighty military machine on paper, but only on paper. On the battlefield, it was a different matter. Poorly trained, ill-informed, unmotivated, and inadequately equipped troops were hampered by severe logistical challenges. When coupled with a lack of effective leadership, the chances of Putin's 10-day plan succeeding were effectively zero. But this is a Russian problem, and such incompetence certainly isn't something that we can assume will also blight the Chinese military. What can be asserted, and will certainly have made the Chinese leadership sit up and take notice, is that Putin completely miscalculated the response of the Ukrainian people. Putin believed that the majority of the apathetic Ukrainian people would willingly align with Russia. Essentially, he didn't think the Ukrainians would put up a fight. This was more than a minor miscalculation. Putin has long believed that the Ukrainians and the Russians were one people who had been separated against their will by the collapse of the Soviet Union. This fundamental misunderstanding of Ukrainian identity and resolve has played a crucial role in the outcome of the invasion. Putin's assumption that Ukrainians would passively accept Russian dominance led to strategic errors and overestimations of Russian support within Ukraine. The fierce resistance put up by the Ukrainian forces and the unity displayed by the Ukrainian people shattered Putin's expectations and prolonged the conflict far beyond his initial projections. Had the Ukrainian population reacted as Putin had expected, then his plan may well have worked, despite the glaring inadequacies of his military machine. But would the Taiwanese population be as motivated to repel an invasion as the Ukrainians were? While there are similarities, the situation is complex, and to fully understand it, we need to take that quick history lesson we promised. China views self-governing Taiwan as a renegade province, destined for eventual reunification under Beijing's control, even if it means resorting to military force. However, Taiwan sees itself as distinct from mainland China, boasting its own constitution, democratically elected leaders, and a unique cultural identity. Even with its proximity to mainland China and strong economic ties, Taiwan has increasingly adopted a separate Taiwanese identity over the years. Many Taiwanese citizens identify more strongly as Taiwanese rather than Chinese, reflecting a growing sense of national consciousness and autonomy. The historical relationship between Taiwan and China is equally complex. While historical records suggest that Taiwan started seeing Chinese settlements in the 17th century, it became a Japanese colony in 1895, following the Qing Empire's defeat in the First Sino-Japanese War. After World War II, Taiwan was returned to Chinese control, but under the leadership of the nationalist Kuomintang or KMT government, led by General Chiang Kai-shek, who fled to the island following the communist victory in the Chinese Civil War in 1949. Despite the KMT's claims of sovereignty over all of China, Taiwan operated as a separate entity known as the Republic of China, retaining its government and institutions. This historical ambiguity forms the basis of China's territorial claims over Taiwan. All the while, Taiwan argues that it was never part of the modern Chinese state established in 1911 or the People's Republic of China established in 1949. But regardless of the history of the island and its superpower neighbor, it is, as Ukraine demonstrated, the will of the people that can make all the difference. So just how committed to independence is the Taiwanese population? Before we look at the position of the Taiwanese population, it's useful to look at how the Ukrainians felt about the Russians before the war, and how this has evolved since the Russians annexed Crimea in 2014. Perhaps surprisingly, the Ukrainians felt positively about Russia up until this date. However, since the annexation of Crimea, the picture changed dramatically and the attitude significantly cooled. The Ukrainian leadership has sought closer ties with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, but it's interesting to note that popular support for such a move was more divided. Even after the annexation of Crimea, the Ukrainian people remained divided. A survey carried out in 2019 revealed some interesting figures. At that point, over 60% of the Ukrainian population still wanted good and positive military relations with Russia, and just over 50% thought the same about military relations with NATO. However, the figures also showed that 44% of the population would consider joining NATO, whereas less than 30% sought closer military cooperation with Russia. Ultimately, what the figures prove is while external factors and historical context play a significant role in shaping public sentiment, the will of the people is complex and cannot be easily categorized. Although reading Putin's mind is never easy, it's conceivable that figures like this help persuade him and his military leadership that the Ukrainians wouldn't put up much of a fight. These are the lessons that the Chinese will learn from, and what's clear is that the will of the people isn't something that can be easily gauged. Yet it must be accounted for in any military strategy. This is especially relevant as the muddied waters of Ukrainian public opinion about its hostile neighbor can also be applied to Taiwan. Recent surveys in the country have revealed a population that isn't as polarized as many in the West believe. While over 80% of Taiwanese people want to keep the status quo, other figures are not quite so clear. For instance, only 62% of Taiwanese people consider themselves to be Taiwanese, with a third of the population considering themselves to be both Chinese and Taiwanese. But what the war in Ukraine has told us is that these figures can be discarded as meaningless once the bullets start to fly. An unpredictable and potentially catastrophic response from the population is one factor that could persuade the Chinese to think again about their aspirations toward their neighbor. But it's far from the only one. Another significant aspect that could help save Taiwan in the wake of the Ukrainian conflict was the widespread sanctions imposed on Russia in the immediate aftermath of the invasion. Again, there isn't a clear-cut reason here, as it could be argued that sanctions have failed to stop Russia's war machine and, in this sense, they have failed. However, whether the threat of sanctions would deter China from military action against Taiwan will boil down to how important the Chinese leadership considers economic prosperity. What is clear is that for the past 40 years or so, economic growth has been the most important thing for them. This pursuit of economic expansion remains relevant today, with the country venturing into new markets such as electric vehicles and renewable energy to sustain its growth trajectory. For instance, more than half the electric vehicles on the roads worldwide are found in China, and the country was responsible for 35% of electric vehicle exports in 2022. The renewable energy figures are even more impressive, with the country now producing 80% of the world's solar panels. To put some perspective on this, the United States produces 2%. Invading Taiwan would be at odds with this strategy, and the imposition of sanctions could disrupt this growth significantly. China's reliance on global trade and investment means that any significant economic repercussions could have far-reaching consequences. The interconnectedness of the global economy could amplify the impact of sanctions, potentially inflicting damage on various sectors, industries, and key members of the Chinese leadership. The threat of sanctions also carries symbolic weight, although China is not renowned for being overly concerned by such matters. Nevertheless, it signals to the international community that certain actions, such as military aggression or human rights violations, will not be tolerated. This could isolate China diplomatically to a degree that such symbolism could make a difference. But would the West be as quick to impose sanctions on the Chinese if they were to invade Taiwan? The short answer is yes. The West, specifically the G7 countries, which includes the US, the UK, Germany, Canada, Japan, France, and Italy, would likely impose sanctions if the situation in the Taiwan Strait were to escalate beyond mere posturing. In the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the G7 countries would face significant pressure from their citizens, as well as from the broader international community, to take decisive action. Failure to respond to such aggression could undermine the credibility of the G7's commitment to defending democratic values and deterring authoritarian aggression. Additionally, the economic power wielded by the G7 countries collectively is considerable. Sanctions targeting key sectors of the Chinese economy such as finance, technology, and manufacturing could severely hurt China economically. The prospect of disrupting global supply chains and access to international markets would be a powerful deterrent for Chinese policymakers. However, the decision to impose sanctions would not be taken lightly. The G7 countries would need to carefully weigh the potential costs and benefits of such actions, considering the broader implications for regional stability, global trade, and geopolitical dynamics. Coordination among G7 members and other like-minded allies would be essential to ensure a unified and effective response. So the Ukraine war may have sown some seeds of Chinese doubt as far as the resistance of the Taiwanese people and the reaction of the international community goes. But what about militarily? Has what's been happening on the battlefields of Ukraine helped save Taiwan from the heightened aggression of China? The war in Ukraine has been closely monitored, not just for its immediate impact on the region, but the broader military lessons that can be gleaned from the conflict. What has become clear is that the face of modern warfare has changed forever, and merely having a mighty military is no longer a guarantee of battlefield success. From the outset, it became evident that Putin's ambitious timeline for the invasion did not match the realities on the ground. The Ukrainian forces' resilience and determination, coupled with the effective international support, have posed significant challenges to the Russian military machine. But beyond the specific circumstances of the conflict, there are wider implications that are relevant to Taiwan's security situation. One of the main points is the questions that have been raised by the performance of the Russian military. Disregarding the poorly trained troops, the shocking state of much of their hardware, and the awful logistics, the overall effectiveness of large-scale conventional forces in modern warfare must be questioned. This fact is corroborated by the Russian casualty figures. Obtaining accurate figures is always difficult in the fog of war, but a declassified US intelligence report assessed Russian casualties to be around 315,000 dead or injured as of the end of 2023. To put this figure in perspective, it represents nearly 90% of the personnel it had when the special operation started. These figures go a long way to explaining why Russia is being forced to replenish its army at the rate of 30,000 new soldiers each month. Despite Russia's significant military arsenal, including tanks, artillery, and air power, its operations have faced formidable obstacles. The use of tens of thousands of drones by the Ukrainians, many of them off the shelf, has helped to even the playing field. The ability of these sub-$1,000 machines to hit multi-billion-dollar military assets has changed the shape of warfare. Drones are being used by the Ukrainians and Russians for everything from resupplying troops to target acquisition. Effectively, the mere threat of drone attacks has forced military hardware assets like tanks to move several miles from the front line. Additionally, ground troops are citing drones that drop munitions as their biggest threat. They also say that there are so many in the air that it's difficult to move from trenches or reinforced dugouts. While this scenario will apply to both sides in any modern conflict, it must be considered something of a playing field leveler when assessing the military balance between adversaries. A look at the Ukrainian drone industry shows just how critical this is. From being virtually non-existent at the start of the conflict, there are now over 200 companies producing drones in Ukraine. Officials in the country have set a target of over 1 million domestically produced first-person view (FPV) drones in 2024, at a cost of just a few $100s per drone. They also plan to produce more than 11,000 medium and long-range attack drones. The Russians too are ramping up production. However, given the Russian track record with military hardware, it won't be a surprise to hear that these are badly made and unreliable. Yet in terms of sheer numbers, they have at least doubled the amount of drones in use in the hottest war zones. As far as FPV drones go, obtaining accurate figures for how many the Russians are using is difficult. However, Russian First Deputy Prime Minister Andrei Belousov recently announced that the annual production of unmanned aerial vehicles is to be tripled to a planned 32,500 per year in a program costing $7.66 billion. It can also be claimed that the use of drones and other unmanned systems has demonstrated the evolution of warfare into a more decentralized form. Unlike traditional conflicts dominated by large, centralized military forces, modern warfare increasingly involves a diverse array of participants, including non-state components and irregular forces, using advanced technology to disrupt conventional strategies. This is something that presents both challenges and opportunities for Taiwan's defense planners as they seek to adapt to the changing nature of warfare. Similarly, it's a scenario that can only sow more seeds of doubt within the Chinese leadership regarding the feasibility and success of any military action against Taiwan. Of course, the irony is that the Chinese remain one of the biggest manufacturers of the many non-military drones that are now being repurposed. Yet these have become fundamental in modern warfare and are playing a major role in the rising risks and costs of military actions. Ultimately, drone warfare is a factor that could mean that Chinese policymakers are compelled to reconsider their approach to Taiwan, prioritizing diplomatic solutions and de-escalation over confrontation and coercion. But drone warfare alone isn't reshaping modern warfare. Another factor that has emerged and could help to dissuade the Chinese is the use of cyber attacks as a weapon of war. Cyber attacks must now be considered a legitimate tactic of modern warfare. In terms of how that's changing warfare, we can look at a Google estimate that shows how Russian cyber attacks on Ukraine have increased by 250% since 2020. The Ukrainians are also highly active in this sphere and have been near the top of the global rankings for digital attacks since Russia's invasion of Crimea in 2014. These attacks are not restricted to military targets either. The Russians have consistently targeted civilian infrastructure, including energy grids and power stations that often run outdated software. Both sides have used this to create an atmosphere of fear and to demoralize the civilian population. This is a strategy that the Taiwanese could readily employ against the Chinese should they decide to escalate the situation in the Taiwan Strait. For Taiwan, learning from this and enhancing its cyber capabilities to defend against potential Chinese aggression could also help dissuade China from an all-out attack. Hybrid war tactics are also worth mentioning. Hybrid war tactics are difficult to quantify and certainly include many of the topics we've already covered in this video, including trade policy, cyber attacks, and export controls. However, the concept of hybrid warfare is not new, with many experts tracing its roots to ancient military strategies that combined military force with diplomacy, espionage, and propaganda. What sets contemporary hybrid warfare apart is the rapid evolution of technology and the increasing interconnectedness of global economies, which have magnified the impact of non-traditional tools and tactics. In the context of the China and Taiwan situation, hybrid attacks can work both ways. While China may seek to use hybrid warfare strategies to coerce Taiwan and undermine its sovereignty, Taiwan can also employ similar tactics to deter aggression and defend its interests. For Taiwan, hybrid warfare offers a means to exploit China's vulnerabilities and asymmetrically counter its larger and more powerful adversary. This threat would not be enough on its own to dissuade the Chinese from military action, but as part of a bigger picture, the Chinese would be foolhardy to disregard this as a factor. Finally, we need to consider the role of the international community and its response in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Specifically, let's look at the American response and why this will be the final nail in the coffin of China's Taiwan ambitions. China is acutely aware that Taiwan holds far more strategic and economic significance to the United States than Ukraine ever could. Positioned at the forefront of the world's semiconductor production, Taiwan's technology industry is indispensable to global innovation and economic stability. But it goes deeper than purely economic importance. Taiwan occupies a critical position within the Western Pacific island chain, a region dominated by American strategic interests stretching from Hokkaido to the Philippines and Singapore. Historically, the United States has vigorously defended this island chain against external threats, from the Pacific theater of World War II to the ongoing geopolitical maneuvering in the region. American commitment to maintaining dominance in the Western Pacific has been continual and ongoing. The strategic importance of Taiwan as a linchpin in this chain cannot be overstated. Additionally, Taiwan's semiconductor industry, concentrated in the renowned Hsinchu Science Park, is vital to the functioning of modern technology. Any disruption to its operations would send shockwaves across global supply chains, impacting everything from consumer electronics to critical infrastructure. The size of the Taiwan semiconductor sector is staggering. In a market that was worth $523 billion in 2023, Taiwanese companies accounted for 65% of all sales, with one company, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, claiming 61% of the market share as of spring 2023. Given America's ongoing assistance for Ukraine in their struggle, the Chinese will be fully aware that America will not stand idly by and allow China to assert control over Taiwan. The prospect of ceding dominance over such a crucial region and its sea routes to a geopolitical rival is simply untenable for American interests. The historical precedent of American intervention in defense of this island chain serves as a powerful deterrent to any aggressive actions by China. Ultimately, the recent announcement of an American $2 billion aid package for Taiwan and other security partners in the Indo-Pacific region demonstrates this commitment. It also provoked a scathing response from China, describing the move as pushing Taiwan into a dangerous situation. But such rhetoric from the Chinese is not new. The war in Ukraine might just be enough of a demonstration of the folly of misconstrued military actions to prevent the saber-rattling from escalating into actual conflict. The lessons learned from the Ukraine war are ultimately what could save Taiwan from a similar fate. The unpredictability of an invaded population, the changing face of modern warfare, and the steadfast support of key allies like the United States and other nations all contribute to Taiwan's resilience in the face of Chinese aggression. What do you think? Do you think that China invading Taiwan is a foregone conclusion? Or will China learn from the lessons of the war in Ukraine and step back from the brink? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out how China got too scared to invade Taiwan, or click this other video instead.